Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 18 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights, in which the Sharks have won 5-2. So a few interesting things that we can take out from this game. The first one is the fact that the Sharks are now on a 3-game winning streak, which is not something really anybody was expecting. If you had told me this a month ago, I would have called you crazy, and yet the Sharks have now managed wins against the Dallas Stars, who are pretty good, the Minnesota Wild, who are okay, and the Golden Knights, who coming into today found themselves second place in the entire league, and the Sharks take them down 5-2 in regulation. So an extremely impressive win for the San Jose Sharks. And if we actually take a look at this season as a whole for San Jose, if we remove the first 5 games, and obviously that sounds a bit weird, you can't just remove the first 5 games, but honestly, the Sharks look like a completely different team than what they were doing in those first 5 games of the season. If we remove those 5 games, the Sharks are actually 6-4-3 in their last 13. Now, this is technically still more losses than victories, 7 losses to 6 victories, but in today's NHL with the loser point, that actually puts them at an above 500 record. The Sharks have definitely been significantly better than they were in those first 5 games over these past 13. Now, is there any sort of real conclusion that we can draw from that? Not necessarily. Does this mean that the Sharks will be competitive for a playoff spot? Not necessarily there either. In fact, it still wouldn't be a surprise to see the Sharks find themselves outside of a playoff spot come the end of the season. But this is a situation where if you were hoping for the Sharks to come last place, second to last place, if the Sharks are continuing to play as they have over these past few games, not just the past 3 games, the Sharks may end up finishing in a pretty unfavorable spot when it comes to the draft, like an 8th last or a 9th last, something along those lines. Another thing we can actually take out of this win was a regulation win coming against the Vegas Golden Knights has not been something that the Sharks have easily come by in their history against this team. This team came into the NHL in 17-18, and over the last 18 regular season matchups between these two clubs, the Sharks had never beaten the Golden Knights in regulation in those last 18 games. In fact, the Golden Knights had won 15 of those games. 15-0-3 in the last 18 matchups between these two squads. And so the fact that it was this Sharks team that took down this Golden Knights team in this particular year is extremely surprising, and yet the Sharks managed to do exactly that. In the first period of this game, the Golden Knights would get a goal in the dying seconds of the first period, even though the Sharks continue to allow goals late in periods. It actually hasn't necessarily hurt their momentum or anything all that much, when it's usually a kind of a tough thing to deal with. Maybe it's because the Sharks have given up so many of them that they've become immune to any sort of momentum swings coming from it. But Eichel scores in the last 4 seconds of the first period to give the Golden Knights a 1-0 lead. Going into the second period, the Sharks would tie it up relatively early on with a Luke Cunnin goal to make it 1-1, but then in the last few minutes once more, Marchessault would score, and the Golden Knights would take a 2-1 lead into the third period. And the Golden Knights, of course, finding themselves second place in the entire league, they've been very good at holding on to leads that they've had going into the third period, and yet it would not be the case here tonight. Not only would the Sharks get the win, they get the regulation win, and this would come thanks to a game-tying goal from Matt Nieto within the first couple minutes of the third period that would make it 2-2. Then later on in the third, the Golden Knights would get a power play for themselves, and the Sharks' penalty kill was, as usual, very solid here tonight, kept the Golden Knights off the board on the power play. And as soon as that power play expired, the Sharks would get a power play of their own, and they would win the special teams battle, which would be the difference maker here tonight. Timo Meier off of a very nice passing play, good nice little pass to get it away from pressure by Barabanov, and a nice kind of drop pass type of play by Logan Couture to get it to Timo Meier, who is all alone, and he makes the Golden Knights pay his 8th of the season to take the 3-2 lead. The Golden Knights will immediately pull the goaltender since there were about less than 3 minutes to go at this point, and the Sharks very quickly convert into an empty net goal, and then eventually a second empty net goal in the last few seconds. Couture and Ferraro would be the beneficiaries for those, and the Sharks, as I said, would take the regulation win over the Golden Knights for the first time in many, many years for these two divisional opponents. First, let us move on here to the players to talk about. We have got, of course, the first line for the San Jose Sharks, Meier, Hertl, and Labanc, as they continue to lead the way for the San Jose Sharks. Yada, yada, yada. They're the best line on the team. That is no surprise to anybody at this point. I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but that is just because they continue to lead the way, and it's really no surprise when you take a look at the depth chart here that this line is going to be the best. But it's very nice to see Timo Meier actually turn this season around rather quickly. Remember that in the first 6 games of this year, Timo Meier had a grand total of 0 goals scored, which was extremely worrying just for the San Jose Sharks as a whole, because not only was, it was a bad fall off from last season's amazing performance of 76 points, but also because the 2 prior years before that 76-point performance, Meier was relatively disappointing. And so if he didn't do particularly well this year, it would begin to make the 21-22 season actually look like a bit of a fluke. So the Sharks needed him to do well here if they wanted to be able to, keep him as a solid player as a contract, and he has done exactly that. After 6 scoreless games in the first 6 games of the year, he has now scored 8 in his last 12 games. Fantastic pace at this point. That is a grand total now of 8 over 18 games, which as a sort of pace over a full season would put him at over 30 goals, similar to what he had last year. So Meier definitely has turned it around. Hertl, he has definitely been playing pretty well. I won't take that away from him, though I still think Meier has been a tier above Tomas Hertl, but I would like to see still a bit more from Hertl. He obviously signed the massive contract last year, 8 years with the San Jose Sharks, just over $8 million. And so you're hoping that, considering his age, the first few years of this contract need to be his best years, and so you're hoping for something to come out of Tomas Hertl, and while he has been good, you're hoping for great, definitely. And then when it comes to Kevin Labanc, not as impactful here tonight as he had been in the previous couple of games on this first line, but he has still been doing a decent enough job. Did have a fantastic look after some bad giveaways from the Vegas Golden Knights. Labanc comes right down the middle with a great chance to actually take the lead. This was in the third period after the game was already 2-2, but he hits the post. It didn't end up mattering, of course, because Meier would score later on and the Sharks would win and all of that, but that was his one great opportunity. But otherwise, it was a good game, but not a great game for Labanc, kind of like with Hertl. Meier was really the one I felt leading the way on the top line. The second line as a whole, I thought definitely had an improvement over their past couple of games. Barabanov, Couture, and Nieto as a unit definitely looked better than they had in the past. It's really a situation that is kind of dependent on how Nieto plays as a whole. When Nieto isn't necessarily doing very, very good things at all, it's a situation where the Sharks only have 2 good players on this line, and so not much happens. But when Nieto actually plays well, which is good enough to be serviceable on a second line type of situation, the second line actually starts to look pretty decent. So I was very impressed with Matt Nieto's play, that not only kept this puck alive in the zone on his goal, but then he moves to the net like a goal scorer should do, and he puts a nice move onto Logan Thompson to get that game-tying goal early on in the third period to really sort of bring the game back to even. So a nice little game from Matt Nieto for sure, and because of that, Barabanov and Couture got to actually play their own game and looked quite solid themselves. When it comes to the other 2 lines here, Sturm, Kunin, and Bonino, we can technically point to the fact that they did generate a goal for the San Jose Sharks. That was Luke Kunin in the second period that tied the game up at 1, but it wasn't necessarily the most impressive goal as a whole for this unit. It was, I believe it was Nico Sturm who gets the puck behind the net. He passes up to Karlsson. Karlsson takes a shot. It gets blocked and goes directly to Kunin, and he's able to sort of tap it in as Logan Thompson was still trying to locate where the puck actually went after that deflection. So not necessarily a super hard-working, amazing type of goal for this shift like it was for the Nieto goal, but still, I guess that is a positive. They definitely didn't get as dominated as they have been in the past, had a few decent chances for themselves, so it was a okay game from the third line to go with a very solid game for the San Jose Sharks as a whole. Besides that first period where I felt as though they were outplayed, they were likely the better team in both the second and third periods. And then when it comes to the fourth line, this one left a bit to be desired, really didn't have much ice time at all in this game, which has really been a theme for David Quinn here thus far in these past few games. Earlier on in the season, of course, the fourth line did get decent minutes because that was when Nico Sturm was in that position, but now that Nico Sturm is on the third line and the Sharks are kind of icing like a somewhat meh fourth line, this line is not really getting a lot of minutes. We saw early on in the game there was a bad Lindblom giveaway that gave a first line shift for the Golden Knights in the offensive zone for multiple seconds that got a couple of decent chances on net, and it felt as though from there it was just kind of downhill situation. They only had a few more shifts, didn't play much, didn't do much either. On the defensive side of things, the first thing to talk about, though I didn't write his name, is that there was a replacement for Radim Shemek for this particular game, and that was, of course, Nick Cicek. It was a question of whether or not Scott Harrington would draw into the lineup. He has been the seventh defenseman for the San Jose Sharks thus far this season, but of course, Harrington has played 2 games already for the Sharks this year, and he has been very bad in both of them. So I'm not opposed to the San Jose Sharks trying somebody from the Barracuda in this particular situation, and I must say that Cicek's game did not go well at all. In fact, you could probably say he is the primary reason why the Golden Knights actually managed to score both of their goals in this particular game. He was on the ice for both of those goals, and that wasn't just a coincidence. He really was the deciding factor on both of them. He had just a complete lack of coverage onto Eichel here in this situation. Jack Eichel, who was just left completely alone in the dying seconds of this third period, allowed all the time in the world to be able to take this shot. You can't allow that to happen, and Cicek is just kind of in no man's land a bit in that type of situation, not really respecting the defensive zone coverage. And then on the Marchessault goal, Cicek kind of stands up near the blue line but makes kind of a weak play in that situation, which allows Marchessault to just get right by him for the 2-on-1 situation. Marchessault with the very nice shot beats Reimer. And so honestly, Cicek, he got a few shifts in this game, got okay ice time for a sixth defenseman, and he was not good at all. So going into the next game, I would hope at the very least that he wouldn't get another one. I feel as though it would be weird to reward him in that situation. Should Scott Harrington step in? Should the Sharks look to the Barracuda for somebody else to come up at this point? I'm not entirely sure what the solution is, but Cicek did not have a very good debut here, and I imagine if it was like a Ryan Merkley type character, he probably would not have even gotten any ice time after the first goal against. So the fact that Cicek still got ice time after the second one is certainly an interesting call, but hopefully he won't get any more. No offense to him, of course. And then finally, to talk about the goaltending for the San Jose Sharks, we had Reimer getting this one once again. It seems as though he has the early season sort of starting spot for the San Jose Sharks. I had originally had a bold prediction that Kahkonen would end up being the starter for the San Jose Sharks by the end of the year, mostly because I felt as though Reimer would end up getting traded near the deadline, and the Sharks would kind of have to go with Kahkonen. But it's been pretty clear thus far that Kahkonen has been kind of bad, while Reimer has been quite good, and that continued here tonight. Another solid performance after the solid performance a couple nights ago against the Minnesota Wild gave the Sharks a chance to win, and that's exactly what they managed to do. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday, where they will take on the Detroit Red Wings. The Sharks will be back at home there, and we'll see if they can actually keep this winning streak rolling. Class dismissed.